The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And as always, I've got the stark, the contemporary, the man of a variety of vibes. It's Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. How's it going, my very ambient friend?
It is going well. I'm just here rearranging the things on my desk right now because I'm feeling so inspired.
Yes, I also am feeling inspired. I'm about to go buy a rug and polish some brass. That's my plan after the show.
Just make sure the rug is a little bigger than you think that it should be.
Always bigger than you think. And folks, if you're lost, don't worry. All will be revealed, because today we've got a wonderful episode of the show as we continue our Artists On series here. This was a real pleasure in so many ways, Christopher.
Yeah.
First of all, it must be pronounced from the rooftops. Tell the children in the street to spread the word. Extra, extra. Read all about it. The Ravel podcast boys have officially gotten a woman on the podcast. They said it was impossible. They didn't. Yeah, we had our doubters, but we did it, and we're very grateful, and gonna try to do it more.
Yeah.
But it was a real pleasure. Who are we talking to today, Chris?
Yeah, this is Margaret Daniel. We got a tip on the Ravel hotline from her father, Richard, who is a listener of the show, and said, I know a really bright and interesting young artist that you should talk to, and it was his daughter. So he sent us in an email and said, perhaps, give her a call. And we looked through some of her stuff and thought, that would be really interesting. I didn't think when we started this series that an interior designer would be somebody that we would be talking to, but man, am I glad that we did.
Oh my gosh.
Great conversation. Yeah.
Incredible. And another example of how you, dear listener, can be an integral part of the direction of the podcast, even if, maybe you don't know what possibilities may lay ahead. Thank you very much, Richard, for sending that email. And this was really possibly one of my favorite episodes in the series. Like you said, did not originally plan on speaking to an interior designer. Of course, I think we could all make a connection between interior design and art, but oh my goodness, was I impressed and surprised by just how relevant the conversation was to the things we like to talk about, the artistry, the craftsmanship, the effect of interior design, not just on a person or not just on a family, but on society and history as a whole. We also include talking about architecture as well, not just in interior design, but they're inextricably linked. And the conversation goes every which way.
Mm-hmm. Even, designing your, post-apocalyptic bomb shelter or whatever. So
yes. It was fun. We do a little example of what it might be like to work with an interior designer. Margaret helps me, figure out how to best utilize the space and the emotional sort of resonance of my post-apocalyptic survival bunker. So I know that plenty of you will find that interesting and valuable for your own lives. And very knowledgeable and well-read woman here. She was pulling out quotes and concepts from authors all over the place, as well as just an extremely intricate knowledge of the history of architecture, and some of the deeper, the deeper relationship between things like that, and not just our lives as individuals, but the history of the world. It was really incredible. My mind was blown over and over. Yeah. And we also get into some other deep topics, which you will just get to enjoy as they come. A nice surprise. So let's see here. Anything else we need to warn anybody about? Trigger warning. So. Trigger warning. If talk about beautiful things upsets you, this is not the podcast for you. Amen. This is only for the hardcore people out there that can handle pontification about beauty and the role of aesthetics on the human mind and spiritual life. Okay, Chris is laid down for a nap. Chris is taking a quick nap, which means we are going to start the podcast. Here you go. Enjoy this episode with Margaret Daniels. With us today, we have Margaret Daniels. She's an interior designer and a writer based in New York. And this is going to be fun. We're going a little off the rails. You didn't think we were going to talk to an interior designer, folks, but here we are, keeping you on your toes. And with us here, we have Margaret Daniels. How are you, Margaret?
Doing quite well. How are you?
Oh, just having such a good time. And this is fun. So you are an interior designer and a writer, so creative person all around, artist, if I may dare. But you know, when a podcast or a person or a show is like, okay, we're going to be talking to artists, I don't know if most of them would think about bringing on an interior designer, and that is a fault on them that we luckily can avoid. We can say that we were a little bit more thorough. So tell us first a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where'd you get to where you are now? And then we can really jump into it.
I have always been interested in the built environment. My passion for interior design started when I was in middle school. I had previously been interested in being a wedding planner or event coordinator, and then thought, no, I'm far more interested in the built environment and the context in which these events take place, and thought, okay, then I think I should be a realtor. And I believe in sixth grade thought, that seems a little bit maniacal or unfeeling to go from building to building without any concern for where a project goes, or you create this context for an event, or you as a realtor try to show a family the potential that a home has for their own story. But then to kind of leave it at the starting point felt so hollow. And at that point I thought, no, I want to be an interior designer. I want to be someone who understands a family deeply, understands a commercial environment and the purpose that it is intended to serve, and realize that vision for the people who occupy the space, to glorify the everyday human experience, to edify the simple, ordinary things that we do. And at that point, was determined to pursue interior design, and that did not waver. I toured the university I attended, SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, for the first time when I was 13. And yes, eventually went there and pursued a degree in interior design and architectural history.
Ooh.
From there, I moved to New York City to work for a luxury residential interior design firm and had the privilege to travel with them and create some really spectacular interior environments. And then just 6 months ago, was able to go out on my own and take on my own design clients across the East Coast, and have been working for myself now, writing and doing interior design, and am loving the marriage of these two different media, and ways to express a story and to tell a story. And I write for a few shelter publications and lifestyle brands as well. So it's a fun way to stay to keep myself on my toes, really, and get to explore storytelling in these different ways.
You left out WebMD in there, I
Oh,
noticed.
yes. So WebMD, of course, is notorious for its symptom checker and for taking such simple cold and flu symptoms and convincing you have cancer. And I actually
Yes.
am a writer for their physician publication, Medscape, and I write lifestyle pieces for them. So rest assured, doctors do write the actual medical articles, but I get to explore my passions like horticultural therapy and interior design psychology and write pieces on those, and what's going on at the forefront of healthcare design, and what new practices are we utilizing to look at patient health holistically. So that's my other fun
Holy
side endeavor.
smokes.
Quite
Yeah.
broad.
Well, I
Indeed.
think that's a great example of how this interior design or, built spaces, built environment, how I'm learning some vocab as we go here. Um, it's so interesting how it's probably doesn't get as much attention than it maybe deserves, but it's one of those things that applies to just like literally every space a human inhabits. Like when you
Right.
think of art, there's like, okay, painting and music and sculpture and these things that you can come directly in contact with in sort of the context of art. Whereas interior design is this art form that is inhabited constantly, whether it's thought about or not, but may have similar or even more of an effect on a human being, coming in contact with that art than someone, standing in front of a painting. I mean, is this really, I don't know, I find it this very deep sort of philosophical art form of like creating the space in which you inhabit, which has all sorts of utility to it. And, it's not just looking beautiful, but it has to work well. It has to feel good. It has to, perhaps if it's a commercial space, it's got certain goals. If it's a residential space, it's a certain other type of goal. It's like this really all-consuming concept that we don't really think about that often, I guess.
You're right. It is really multifaceted. And what I love about it again is, okay, for someone to experience photography in a meaningful way in a museum or a painting, it sits inside a building, and the building plays a large part in the presentation and reception of the art that it houses. And a large reason that people go to certain museums over others is because of aesthetic qualities seen in the architecture. And
Mm.
again, every human being experiences multiple built environments in a single day. And it really is, as you referenced, this deeply profound field, because there's such a unspoken and subconscious connection that we all have to buildings through observation and interaction. And then buildings are also designed to be highly remarkable and things that we discuss and that enter our cultural identity and inform our lexicon. And that is one of the things that drew me to design psychology, most specifically, looking at the power of color and pattern and scale to uh, dictate a human's experience in an environment. I think of the contrast between the brutalist and Beaux-Arts movements. So the Beaux-Arts movement came out of France in the mid 1800s to early 1900s, and it really, of course, beau means beautiful. So it's this emphasis on beauty and in all types, fashion, architecture, etc. It came from the École des Beaux-Arts, which was a art school, fine art school in France. And this movement emphasized heavy ornamentation and the marriage of craftsmanship with artistry, and emphasized buildings that glorified the human scale and made buildings approachable. And it's referred to as the architecture of happiness. It has provable positive psychological effects on its viewers and inhabitants. Then, come 50 years later, you have the brutalist and international movements, spearheaded most notably by architect Le Corbusier, who built these very stark, imposing, massive buildings that were often high-rise urban housing developments and government complexes. And the intent
Yeah.
behind international and brutalist buildings is to intimidate, to show power. And
I'm
I
kind
mean,
of
Germany, of course,
imagining like Soviet government
yes,
buildings, like big concrete, sort of absurd displays of strength.
exactly. Lots of concrete, a lack of color. It all feels very dystopian, and especially as these buildings age, they become more and more dystopian and show their true colors, if you will, and really reveal their the creative intent behind the buildings.
Yeah, so I
Um,
mean, in that context, it's almost like not only is it you know, an experience to be in a beautiful building, or and maybe a negative experience to be in a not beautiful building, but also got this sort of social engineering aspect to it, where it's when you're trying to influence the perception of authority from the public's perspective. If you're trying to communicate like, hey, we're bigger and stronger than you and you better do what we
Right.
say, there's very specific construction instructions to go along with that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about how creative thought has informed society, and how what could be seen as pure artistry, like you're saying, has very real social consequences for years to come. And the power of buildings to um, take the creative intent of their creators and expand that far beyond their own personal reach, beyond their lifetime, and to even wider, greater audiences than they could have ever imagined themselves. It
Wow.
really is stunning to think about.
Wow.
I'm I'm curious, as you've been kind of going through a little bit of a snapshot, kind of a section of history there in architecture. All that I remember from it is like in my liberal arts classes somewhere in my undergrad, and getting just kind of a cursory sort of view of modern and postmodern kind of architecture. And as I remember about it, it was kind of modern architecture is kind of like the function drives the form, if I have that correctly. And then in postmodernism, you kind of had this, like, it was almost like uh, leaving that altogether, and it was more of like a form kind of driving function, or they didn't even have to be necessarily associated. And you got these kind of architectural pieces that were really just more about being art than they were about really having any kind of real purpose other than just kind of looking interesting or being kind of thought provoking. And I might be mixing all of this up. You can kind of correct that, but I'm wondering, where are we today? Like, kind of as we have progressed through the ways that people have thought about. You've talked about the importance of all of the buildings, the shape and everything like that. But where are we at today? Where has all of this moved? And let me know if I was how badly I messed that up.
You did not mess it up. You're exactly right. So the phrase that has grown in popularity and that is drilled into the head of every architecture and interior design student is form follows function. So that came out of that Le Corbusian period. Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, these uh, figures who are known as the leaders of the mid-century modernist movement. And yes, their fascination was with the function of a building and how form must cede to the use of the building, which is quite ironic considering Le Corbusier's architecture does a great disservice to its occupants. And again, just as the Beaux-Arts movement has positive psychological effects, we have seen over and over again the devastating effects of urban housing, which was the brainchild of Le Corbusier and architects from his time period. So
You
it was
mean
supposed to.
when you refer to the devastating effects on the public, you mean like psychologically, like the oppression that some of these buildings, I must apologize. You are naming names and category, putting out some taxonomy there that I've never heard. So
Yeah.
when names are said, I'm going to have to go back and reference exactly what we're talking about.
No, of course.
Yeah.
So we have seen in cities like New York, London, Paris, these high rise, a lot of them are X shaped, you could say X or lowercase t shaped urban buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
They were, Le Corbusier's idea was to take low income urban populations and put them in these really tall towers, typically over 10 stories high, and group them all together to create these micro cities. Well, in hindsight, we see that he basically created little ghettos, and he thought it was great for them to have communities around them. But what it turned into was this isolation of people of a lower socioeconomic class. And it's been seen over and over again that people who grow up in these environments are far more likely to be victims of violent crime, to become incarcerated at one point or another. And there's a destabilization of the family unit that is seen prevalently there, partially influenced by the architecture and the way that it forces its inhabitants to relate to one another and their environment. I live in New York, and I'm in a neighborhood, East Harlem, which is known as the Barrio. And there's a significant amount of urban housing there. And it's in those areas that there is higher crime. And I think part of it has to do with the divorce from nature. There's so little nature and green space surrounding these buildings. They're so tall that there are many windows on the different sides of the structures that receive very little natural light. And we know that, even in hospital settings, patients recover more quickly that have views of nature or have ceilings that are painted blue or green or have landscape paintings in their room versus modern abstract art. So we know that this connection to the natural world is highly important. And again, this care for the whole person in the built environment. And while these famous architects from that time were touting the belief that, form follows function and we are serving the people that we build for, their work was doing just the opposite. And the effects of that are still with us today.
Wow.
So that's kind of where we were about 100 years ago, and up until the mid 20th century. And then again, yes, we went into the postmodernist movement, and that's where we get the term starchitect. So these egocentric architects who most famously is Frank Gehry. He's definitely the American starchitect of the 20th century who didn't have any concern for the function of a building or the inhabitants. He just wanted to create, works of art that would garner praise for himself. And so famously, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles has melted cars that have been parked across the street from it because of the intensity of the reflection from the sun, hitting the facade. So
and
that's where we went.
That Disney Concert Hall it's basically like a giant reflective metal structure. It's fun to look at for sure, but the materials and the angles at which it reflects the sun are just like turn it into some crazy death ray machine that melts things around it, right?
Yes, it's crazy.
Wow.
And so that's what's been dominating our architectural field for quite a while, and what education has really pushed for. And then now we're entering, I heard it referred to the other day as the neo-Aristotelian model, where we're moving away from a concern for the objective or subjective beauty of architecture and literature, and we're far more concerned now with the experience of the viewer and what they think about it. It's less about the work itself. And so I'm curious to see how this is going to start to play out in architecture, because to me,
you mean like the viewer as opposed to the inhabitant, or
exactly
both? Yeah,
and
okay.
I would think the architect as well, which still seems quite in line with the postmodernist movement in architecture. And I'm just curious to see how this will change architecture again. If we're already just focusing on the form as opposed to the function, will this swing the pendulum the other way where we begin to consider again the function of the building, or will it take us in a different direction entirely? I'm not quite sure
That
what that's going to look like.
that is incredible. I mean, you talk about art, and yet, art of different kinds, it inhabits our minds and our lives in very specific and broad ways. Music, you don't just listen to the music you like, but there's music in the elevator, there's music in the department store, there's music in advertisements, there's music everywhere. And in kind of a same fashion, if not more so, this architecture and interior design is a piece of art that not only is literally ever present, unless you're just out in the woods somewhere, but has just these outstandingly intimate effects on everybody in or around it, and the importance of that in like history, and how it can modify the behavior or the feelings or the emotional life or the spiritual life or the political perspective or whatever of just massive amounts of people based on a building is really heavy, bro. My goodness.
This I don't. I had told you already, Margaret. I wanted to ask you about this, and it seems like just as good a place to introduce it as any. But because of those kind of psychological sorts of elements that come along with architecture and interior design, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about feng shui, because it was something that
I was going to mention.
I heard about, a long time ago, and people, it had a really big movement there for a little while. It was quite popular, and people were talking about how important it is that you arrange, your living spaces in such a way, not only to, optimize efficiency, but also to create moods and environments. And I wonder, first of all, is anybody adhering to that, or has it been modified? Where are we at with feng shui? And could you talk a little bit about the importance of the way we organize our living spaces in our lives?
And if I may also just add something to that, we talk about art and how it not only expresses ideas about God, but the effect that it can have on just general spirituality. I mean, we don't need to get straight to the entity of God quite yet, but human spirituality being, a sort of core target for art, whether the artist intended it or not. Feng shui being a spiritual technology from the East that is very, regimented and established, I guess is the word, and an actual spiritual practice that was employed at the time, as I understand it. Well, I mean, feng shui people, artists, whatever, were almost considered like priests in a way. Because of the spiritual implications of their work. And I would love to get into that. First, teach us something about feng shui, please. Or feng shui, as they said on, I don't know, some movie I saw. And I'd love to get into sort of the spiritual aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah, so feng shui is not something that I have had to encounter in practice yet. I have not had any clients request that the principles of feng shui be observed in the home. I think they've definitely slipped into the culture through different avenues, like Marie Kondo and her principles of organization. They're heavily founded in feng shui. But feng shui is this Taoist idea, and it comes from Asia, and Tao, of course, means the way. And it's a transcendent, spiritual, conscious way of living. And so feng shui centers on these 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, water, and metal. And it deals with energy. So there's something called the Bagua map, or the Bagua areas, and they relate to health and wealth, family, prosperity, career, knowledge, Tai Chi, being a helpful person.
Are these areas
And
of thought, or like chakras in some kind of weird Hinduism thing? Are you talking about they're just
Types of energy or something?
Yeah, so they kind of straddle both. You actually lay them out over a floor plan of a home and
Mm.
designate different areas of the house to these different energies. And so the way that you organize the space and clean it and position furniture relates to how the energy fields interact and are supposed to interact with you. So another core tenet is the commanding position. So feng shui is three parts. It's those five elements. It's the commanding position, and it's the energy maps or the bagua. And the commanding position relates to beds, desks, and stoves, actually. So that deals with wealth and nourishment. And the bed represents you, yourself, your life. So you have to position a bed in a direct line of sight with a door, but it can't be directly in front of it. And your stove has to be looking out into the room. Your desk is supposed to be looking out into the room so that you are commanding the energy around you and living a well ordered life that you are fundamentally in control of. And windows represent the eyes of your home and the eyes of your life. And so they're supposed to be clean, and cluttered, clouds the mind. So surfaces are supposed to be free from excess papers and are supposed to be left tidy. So it's this very interesting idea of our home as more than a conglomeration of objects that have value, but it's also how those objects and their orientation dictate the way that we move throughout the world and the way that we conduct ourselves. A cluttered home is a symptom of a cluttered mind. And so feng shui seeks to get rid of those things and to make you prosperous.
It seems like while some of that might seem whatever to some people, like hocus pocus, you were touching on some of the elements there of feng shui related even a little bit to some of what you had been talking about in when you were just talking about architecture, clean windows, for example, and you were talking about, people being healing quicker when, they have whatever, a window to see into the outside and those sorts of things. So how have you parsed the truth of feng shui versus these kind of psychological ramifications that we see related to architecture? What's the answer to this problem here, in your opinion?
I think the value of feng shui, or the importance of it, the truth that can be gleaned from it, is again the human need for nature. And I myself know that I function most effectively when my room is clean.
Yeah.
And to get up every day and make your bed, that's a good orderly practice that helps you to set yourself up for a better, successful day. And the other, I guess, kind of soft elements of feng shui would be its emphasis on plants and the natural
Mm.
environment, which, of course, we know clean and purify air. So having a large number of healthy plants in your home, I think those kinds of things are important. It even, stresses having soothing colors in a bedroom, and that's known to help you wake up in a better mental state, if you will. Um, so I think those kinds of things are important. Thinking about the way that you order your space, thinking about the way that you interact with your home, and see it as a vehicle um, to conduct your life, and a vehicle for community, and a facilitator of community, if you will, and your family life as well. So I think it's important to prioritize the cleanliness of your home and organization, and of course design, which is why I do this. I think there is something extraordinarily powerful about our spaces, specifically our interiors, and the way that they reflect who we are and enable us to live effectively.
Mm. When you're working on a project, you're talking about reflecting who we are. And as you are an artist, and that's kind of what we're getting at here, that really kind of just resonated with me. The reflection of who you are. How, when you're doing an interior design project, and I don't know, we haven't really actually talked if you do mostly residential or commercial, or where you're at, but if you're doing a residential, I'm sure you've done them before. How do you find it to be an expression of yourself, but still at the same time you're trying to have the home reflect your client per se? How does that process work?
So currently I do exclusively residential design. I would love to add some commercial work to my roster one day, specifically hospitality design. So thinking restaurants, hotels. And with a home, you get the really unique opportunity to get to know a client very intimately. Obviously, you are designing a space for people and a variety of different people, whether you're doing a commercial or residential project. But what I love with residential is I've had the opportunity to really get to know clients very well, to understand how their lives operate, what is important to them, and to get to see the objects that they already have in their home. So friends will often joke that they get very nervous about having me over because they don't, want me to disapprove of their space. But I quickly assure them that no, I only use my critical eye when I'm in a commercial environment and I'm looking to see how the space serves everyone that comes in contact with it. So I'm looking for ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act um, codes being met so that everyone, regardless of physical ability, has the same experience in the building, or their physical limitations are not exacerbated by the space, so that they can, seamlessly enjoy any environment in which they go into. And of course, I'm looking at lighting and the sound and noise control. Obviously, that's highly important in environments like restaurants where you're trying to create ambiance and ensure that each guest has a pleasant experience and isn't, yelling across the table from someone. So that's when I use my critical eye to look for what's working and what's not. But when I go into someone's house, unless they ask specifically for me to give a critique, for me to give a consultation, I just find it to be a joyful experience. I love seeing what objects people have out on their counters, what decorations they use, what do they need to get through everyday life. Where's their coffee maker? Do they have one? Do they use a French press, a pour over, or a standard coffee pot? I like to see and try to deduce what their day looks like and how they get up, how they go to bed, what their routines are. Um, so as a designer, it just feels like a very high calling to get to explore those things with them and to facilitate life or to make life easier for them with their the different items that they own and the processes that I'm using. So typically I ask questions to get to know them in an interview type session, and then again kind of have this exploratory walk through their home. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, it was how do you like how much of when you're doing interior design at a home is it your clients kind of the expression of themselves, and then how much, like, how do you balance, like, no, you really shouldn't go with this color, or you shouldn't hang this picture there, and then how much do you think it's an expression of yourself as the
So the
gist?
research process helps inform, of course, what I'm picking up on and what decisions I'll make from there. And it really is a collaborative and communicative process and field. It is interesting to get to do that with them. I was on a buying trip this past week with a client and went shopping for a few days by myself first to kind of canvas some stores. We were antiquing, and so I wanted to have an idea of what was being offered and have pieces set aside for her to come view. And that way she could still look around the store herself and find things that she liked on her own, but I could kind of be there to coach her. And so I will try to remind clients if they seem to be getting a little bit farther away from the design direction I'm trying to take them in. I'll try to remind them of the core principles of the project, to engage in storytelling with them, and to kind of paint a picture for them of, okay, if we're in your living room, this lamp, think about how tall it is or how short it is or something, on an end table. This isn't going to be very easy to turn on and off, or that's not going to be a great reading light. So it sounds kind of silly, but it really does have to be these small, personal, anecdotal kind of ways of guiding them and pushing them towards better decisions, where you have to empower a client, I think, too, to see that their opinion is important. And sometimes as a designer, you have to see what you want, because that's part of the creative process. You are informed and know what works, and therefore you have some flexibility. If there's something that just absolutely won't work, you can put your foot down and let them know that. But I think the call of a designer is to be able to glorify the client as well, and just be a partner with them to help educate them in these different decisions and to kind of push them towards better things. So they get to have their voice, and sometimes I allow them to pick an option that's not my favorite because it will still work and it will reflect their personality. And then sometimes I, will kind of draw a line and say, all right, but for the sake of the project and for the sake of the function of the space, we have to go this way.
once
So
once I'm done, you can do whatever you want with it.
exactly.
I find it really fascinating how collaborative that process is. Considering it as an art, there's sort of the stereotypical experience of an artist being sort of a lone wolf in the realm of expression and communication with, pouring their heart out, and whoever is the viewer or partaker of that art is left with the result and just must deal with it however it goes. But this is sort of an interesting collaborative experience where not only are you bringing your own craftsmanship, sort of aesthetic craftsmanship and artistic vision, but it's being used to facilitate not just the vision or desires of another, but in the end facilitate their daily experience. Like create a space that informs literally their whole life, I guess, until they walk out the door. But even then, there's remnants of that experience from their home that they bring out with them, whether it's, drop their kids off at school or go to work or go to an event or something. There's always that, we've all, especially now coming sort of on the back end of the pandemic or whatever, I find myself yearning, I can't wait to get back to my chair. I can't wait to get back to my space, the space that was my prison for a year during the pandemic or whatever. And I was very happy to think, oh, well, at least that means I made some good choices, that the idea of my space waiting for me sort of informs my decisions throughout the day. So it's a very involved thing you got going on here. I'm sort of stricken by the depth of the impact that what you do has on people's whole lives.
Can you, and this is kind of a personal ask for me too. We're doing a little bit of home renovating here myself.
Nice.
And could you just like 5 tips for if you can't afford to have somebody like you come in and tell me what to do,
You don't want to save tips for the end where people can hold on to them?
Sure.
Okay, he just needs some personal tips. This is a personal consultation. She's going to bill you for this, Chris. And if she doesn't, I'm going to bill you.
I heard you mention
and
you
use
did
it to
a bathroom renovation with your brother, and I would love to see pictures.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can make that happen. Yeah. I don't know. It's got a kind of I don't even know how to explain it. I like it. It's good. But as you're thinking about just before we move on to your story, as you're thinking about redesigning a place or designing a place to begin with, furnishing your home, whatever, what are some things that you would encourage people to be thinking about as they're moving into that process? Because I'm just like, whatever kind of looks cool and this might be good here, but what are some quick tips? 3 quick tips.
All right.
Quick tips. The clock is running. For you. I'm going to make you some money on this one, Margaret.
Thank you very much.
There's enough of this taking advantage of the kindness of artists, Chris.
It's for the people.
This is her job.
Exactly. All press is good press, so I don't mind.
There we go.
Some tips. No, that's, of course, being an interior designer, I think it's quite akin to being a doctor, honestly. And I can think of so many times after church, my mom or a friend running up to a doctor friend and saying, does this look odd? Or what do you think about this? My kid has these symptoms. What do you think is going on here? And of course, the doctor very kindly answers. And I didn't think anything of it until I went to school for design and then started practicing. And when you mention you're an interior designer, I can't tell you how many times this has happened in home environments, home settings. So a Bible study, for instance, and you'll be giving introductions, going around the room, stating your occupation. And I mentioned that I'm an interior designer, and the host will say, "Oh, well, I need to hire you. I'd love your ideas." And I'll laugh and say, "Oh, yes, I'd be happy to." And then they'll pause and give a hand motion, and as if they're waiting for me to give suggestions on the
Just
fly.
present themselves.
Hey,
present
us
their space.
theologians deal with that all the time too. People are always asking me about theological questions
Really?
for
Like burning
free.
questions.
And then you
I'm
bill them.
joking.
Oh.
Kind of, but not really. I mean, you do get questions a lot. But anyway, I was trying to relate, but it failed.
But it's interesting. So now I have a lot of sympathy for doctors, and I make a point of not asking questions that they can't bill for, because I know what it's
You
like.
just
And
go
I
to
don't mind.
WebMD. Just go to
Exactly,
WebMD.
exactly. I have access to the archive now, so I don't have to. No, but it is interesting to kind of be asked those questions on the spot. So I think the tip idea is great, but it's funny in real life to have to kind of give those, because of course I can immediately see things that I would suggest, but it's so much deeper than that. And there really is a whole process of thought and planning that has to go behind it, because otherwise I'll just be totally dissatisfied if they implement any suggestion I give on the fly, unless it's like, this painting is hung 3 inches too high, move it down. Because whatever suggestions I give only make sense in the context of the larger work that I'm doing. And it's just one of those interesting things I think you kind of discover as you continue on. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'd be happy to give tips.
Okay, hit us with it. What's the tips?
Oh, okay. All right, right now.
Well, I mean, Chris
like
is eager here. He wants.
I derailed the whole thing. It was going so well.
Oh, we're gonna live
it's
with
perfectly
this,
fine,
Chris. This is where we're at.
Storytelling is still on my mind, so we're fine. All right, rugs
I got
should
you.
always be larger than you think. My preference is to have 18 to 24 inches of flooring exposed on all sides of the room, depending upon the size of the room, granted. But in a bedroom, a living room, you will make it seem far larger if you take the rug out as far as possible. Wow. If you have an awkwardly shaped room that's large enough for 1.5 seating groupings, make the rug larger. If you have furniture to place on it at different points, it won't look awkward. It will help unify the room. So I think people always, out of an abundance of caution, pick rugs that are too small, and they end up with these little furniture islands.
That's a great tip. I'm currently trying to figure out rugs in a big room, and I thought I had a big rug, and I put it in there, and I'm like, well, okay, this is like a floor mat, apparently, and we are just going to gather around the tiny rug every day.
Aren't you glad I asked now, Basil?
So happy, Chris. So happy.
Okay, that's an excellent first tip. I'm thinking, no, I'll just let you go. I'm not going to ask any more questions. Go. Tip number 2.
Oh my gosh, Chris.
Tip number 2.
Hang art lower than you think you need to. A great rule of thumb is the center of a painting, if it's not stacked, if it's just a singular piece hanging on a wall, the center of the painting should be 60 inches from the floor. But that is just a general rule of thumb, and I usually suggest hanging art lower than you think you need to.
That's regardless of how high your ceilings are? 60 inches from the floor? Doesn't matter?
Yeah, because that keeps it eye level, roughly.
Okay.
So a lot of people in hotels hang art obscenely high, and it puts a glare onto the image. You really don't get to experience it. And typically people are a little shy about stacking images, which I love gallery walls. I think that's a great thing to do, or at least stack, 2 pieces on top of each other for some added height and interest. But typically people go a little bit too high. So I say bring it down, typically about 4 inches. If you're hanging a piece over a dresser or, a mantle or something, just leave about 4 to 6 inches between the mantle and the base of that picture. People usually do like 8 to 10, but keep it snug.
Big rugs, low art. Okay, these are incredibly accomplishable tips.
Yes.
Now you have a bachelor's in interior design. That's all you need to know.
And number 3.
Number 3. Dark colors make small rooms feel bigger.
What?
Oh, yeah.
What? I thought
Totally.
as soon as you
I've
said dark
experienced
colors,
that
I said, oh,
myself,
everybody
actually.
knows this one, but then you flipped it around at the end. How is that? Dark
Mm-hmm.
colors
Mm-hmm.
make small rooms feel bigger?
Yes. And draperies that go from the ceiling and pool about an inch on the floor also make the room feel taller and bigger. So in a dark room, you want to use, or in a small room, you want to use a dark color because it helps the corners disappear. And so it feels more expansive and you can't quite tell where the end of the room is or where those corner or the walls meet in the corner. And so it helps it to feel larger. And then if you add drapery, especially on top of that in a similar dark shade, it helps add height to the room because it's one unbroken line that your eye sees from floor to ceiling. So
Love
Huh.
yeah.
it. Okay,
Wow.
okay, yeah. I have a tiny little office, and this sucker's going dark. I'm thinking like a deep red, so I can feel like some sort of Victorian noble while I do podcasting.
Wow.
Those are great tips. Okay, so we got big rugs, low art, and dark small
hmm
rooms.
Wow.
Love it.
That's
Okay.
excellent.
Are you satisfied,
Yes, I
Christopher?
am. Thank you.
Okay.
That was wonderful. Thank
Good.
you so
Good.
much. I'll give you a tip. I'll Venmo you a
There
tip.
you go. Yeah, yeah. Hit her Patreon or something. That's great. Okay, so back to storytelling. We were talking about the collaborative nature when you're working with a client specifically, and how it differs from a lot of other types of art in that you are creating with the person who is going to be living in or appreciating or benefiting from this space, which I find it just now occurring to me. So thank you for the interruption, Chris, because it gave me a
You're
second
welcome.
to draw a line here, which is, I mean, I don't want to reach too much, but I'm curious what you think. I mean, is kind of almost exactly what God did in the garden. He kind of created the garden, created the garden, and then when Adam comes along and has this sort of charge to co-create the world with God, where Adam is essentially the sort of benefactor of the space, of the earth, of physical reality. And in a similar way, you're coming in, you're working with the inhabitant to create something that is going to be the space in which their life story happens, which is pretty profound. Does that spark anything in you?
It does. It does. I have been reading recently about fairy tales and why they're important to read. I'm currently going through the Lord of the Rings trilogy and have
Mm.
been struck by the storytelling component that exists in interior design. It's one of the reasons I was drawn to the field anyway, but in my research, I'm realizing that the psychology that I love is really just centered on relationship building, and relationships obviously exist within the context of your life story and the life stories of everyone around you that you're connected with. And of course, that ties into the fact that we are all living in the gospel story and in space and time, and the space and time into which God has set us or seen fit to give us life. And as I've been considering what I do and what the implications of that are, what it means to do my work excellently and wrestling with that, because it does feel like a very high calling to create the context in which a family lives. And my favorite interior designer, Carlton Varney, says that he believes that the first room you remember as a child dictates your interior design and aesthetic taste for the rest of your
Mm.
life.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
Kind of
wow.
Freudian.
yeah, and I totally agree with him
In
though.
a way.
Yeah, in its own way. Um, and I can think back to my grandmother's living room, which is the first room I remember, and it had some great Federalist and American traditional antiques in there, and a fireplace surround, and beautiful colors and flame stitch upholstery, and those are things that I gravitate towards even now in my work and in my own personal stylistic preferences. And so as I think about the high calling it is to create these homes for these families and to engage in this very intimate experience with them where we're wrestling through what their own personal design style is, we're cultivating that. And as I practice interior design and form an environment for them, I've been thinking about how we relate to interior design, what the story is that people know in the culture. And I think obviously, Joanna Gaines and HGTV, these different cultural icons have given interior design, residential interior design specifically, a prevalence or prominence that it hasn't enjoyed for a while. And the DIY movement as well, especially with COVID, took off as people were confined to their homes, and things that they had just let slide previously they couldn't allow to continue any longer. And so renovations they've been putting off, fixes that needed to occur, they finally got around to and felt motivated to do it and have the time to research it. So it's been interesting to think of the role that design has in the culture at large, and then in the individual relationships I'm cultivating, the individual design stories I'm telling. And I couldn't help but think about Lewis and Tolkien and storytelling, and specifically Lewis's work, Experiment and Criticism, or An Experiment in Criticism, which is where he discusses and theorizes how we should view art and what makes good art or bad art, or what accounts for good taste and bad taste. And he breaks down readers into literary and non-literary readers, and I think that can come on to encapsulate all people who view art. And I think everyone is inherently creative to some extent. We were, of course, made by a creator, and therefore cannot help but exhibit that aspect of his character. And so we're all creative in our own way. But Lewis talks about the literary folk as these engaged readers who love reading and have favorite works that they go back to time and time again. And they love the art for the sake of itself and for a purpose. And then the non-literary people are more passive viewers. They enjoy art, they appreciate it, but they do so in a more passive way. They could read books, but they will probably never read a book multiple times because they already read it. So what would be the point of that? They read the story. There's nothing more to glean from it. And so I've been thinking about our interactions with our environment, and how so often we just float through these different places and never leave our own mark on the context in which we find ourselves, or don't engage it. And then the very conscious way through design that I am shaping the context in which people find themselves. And it's so interesting to think about the truth that's in that. And of course, Lewis came to faith. This is a bit of a nonlinear connection, but Lewis came to faith because of stories, fairy tales, myths, and the truth that he saw in all of them inherently. And I think that those stories, in whatever medium we're telling them, are there and are very present. And it's just interesting to see the different ways that we engage them or choose not to engage them. And so I think through the written word, I get to obviously very tangibly and directly tell the stories of other designers and the environments they've created. And then in my own work, I get to do it in a very nonverbal, very subtle way, through the colors and patterns that I use, through the ways that I develop a floor plan. And my own worldview gets to shine through in those things and tells its own story, whether or not I explicitly communicate that to the client. So I think it's just interesting to consider those things.
Totally. And that literary perspective that you're talking about, I also find fascinating, because in so many stories, whether it's books or television or movies or whatever, it's not uncommon for there to be sort of a secret, invisible character that people don't realize. And that character oftentimes is the setting or the building or the place in which the story is happening, that plays such an important role in the whole story that it might as well be its own character, like written into the story, whether or not, like, for instance, I think of, what's his name? Like the guy who did the Grand Budapest Hotel. Wes Anderson, thank you. Wes Anderson does this pretty often in his films. I mean, in the Life Aquatic, the Belafonte, the ship is almost its own character, even though it's just the place in which things happen. The Grand Budapest Hotel, the hotel in which it happens is almost its own character. The movies, the stories wouldn't be the same in a different place. Same with the Darjeeling Limited. Most of the movie happens on the train, and the train brings its own character. It almost has its own lines in the film that could not have gone to anybody else. And I think in the same way, our homes or our spaces are similar. They're almost like they're not just the place in which our family resides, but they're almost a member of our family, which I think for some people in some contexts, why moving can be so traumatic. I mean, they say that moving is like one of the top 3 traumatic things that you do in life, and can trigger all sort of psychological issues just by moving. And paired with that, the top 3 are like moving, divorce, or death in the family. Death in the family member, you lose a family member. Divorce, you're essentially losing a member of the family. And moving, it's like, it's weird that it's in the list until you think about that space as sort of a character in the story that you're living out.
Right. And the power that it has to form you as a person. I think there's such a joy that I find in creating environments for children, be it playrooms or bedrooms, imaginative bathrooms, because to cultivate your own personal style takes a great amount of work. I think it's a very active pursuit and meditative pursuit. It takes reflection and an understanding of yourself. It takes intentionally exposing yourself to things in different styles, traveling to really find what you love. And so for a child to get to create that primary environment in which they experience the world, and where they play and their imagination is cultivated through reading or the toys that they have, whatever they find to do, it's so powerful to get to, as you said, kind of create this whole other silent character in their life that stays with them in a very powerful way. I mean, we all have memories of playing in our bedrooms, and if we were to sit and pause, we could think about the different details that were significant to us as children, not even necessarily for their aesthetic qualities, but we can think of a favorite bed that we had or bedspread that we just thought was really cool. That there's not necessarily inherent value in that. As you exist day to day, it's just an inanimate object that serves a purpose. But as a whole, and over the course of the child's life, it does play a part in so many different experiences that they have. And I think being in interior design too, something that I've been asked before and had to ask myself is, what value does my vocation have? Obviously, the Lord has gifted me specifically in this way, but I've had people ask before, what meaning does your job have? You deal exclusively in the material world and with material objects. Is your job just materialist? And as I think about that, it is something weighty to consider. But again, I think it's these stories that we're crafting and fundamentally building relationships with clients and understanding their lives that make it so transcendent and make it have more value than just the individual objects themselves. And when I was at L'Abri in Switzerland a few years ago, which is Francis and Edith Schaefer's shelter, is what L'Abri means, but it's their youth center in Switzerland where you can go and stay and study. It was so interesting to read Edith's perspective on homemaking and the importance of the home and creativity to influence and care for the individual holistically, and that spiritual health was very closely linked to your creativity and the expressions of creativity you allowed yourself to have. She was a big believer in interior decoration and floral arrangements and beautiful tablescapes, because she saw that they facilitated good, comfortable conversations, and they kept people at her dinner table for a long time, which allowed them to ask Francis their burning questions about theology and and how they mattered in the world. And so I think it's been interesting to explore what meaning does interior design have apart from the individual objects that I'm purchasing and placing for a client.
Yeah, it's really
I love it.
interesting to me that somebody would make a criticism about your work being materialist. I had heard somebody say one time that God is actually really fond of matter, being as He created it all. And, it is, as we were talking about just previously, it is not only our task, but our great joy as believers to come alongside of Him in that creative work and to take the resources that He's given us in the earth and to steward those. And I was thinking before you even got there, in your explanation about the benefits of it, that as believers, I mean, hospitality is also something that should be very prominent in each one of our lives. And it's very hard to be hospitable, and it's very hard to invite people into your home when it's not in such a way that is welcoming and that does put people at ease and that does let people come in and feel comfortable. And this is not to say, of course, for everybody listening, that you have to have extravagant things in your home, but it is, I think, very important and very valuable in even a spiritual regard, that we are being thoughtful about these things, and we are thinking about how to create and maintain spaces in our homes, in our churches, in our businesses that are welcoming and that do cause people to come in and to be able to let their guard down a little bit and to be able to enjoy, safety. And there are places, and I sometimes wonder, I'm thinking a little bit more about it now in regard to interior design, but sometimes you walk into a place and there's just kind of like a spirit there, like in a home. And usually I equate those things just to kind of spiritual forces that are going on. I'll probably after today start looking more at how things are arranged, but sometimes you can just walk right into the door of a place and you just get a feeling like straight away. So yeah, I mean, anybody who's, critical or kind of scoffing at the fact that I don't know, it seems like a lame criticism. That's all I'm saying.
Don't worry, we're here to defend you, Margaret.
Thank you. I appreciate
and
it.
it's interesting. It sort of harkens. I've had this idea when we first started this this mini series rather, on artists, which is currently turning into a mega series. One of the first sort of biblical references that we played around with in our intro episode was Exodus 36, which is the construction of the tabernacle. And there's very specific, I mean, it's so interesting. So much of the Bible in general can be sort of perceived as vague or non-specific in a lot of ways. I'm just saying in general by the unlearned observer, Christopher.
Okay.
Don't start. Right. Don't start.
I'm keeping
on
my comments to myself.
To a regular, uncredentialed observer, they may think of certain parts of the Bible as vague or open to interpretation or things like this. But Exodus 36 is so specific about the construction and the design and the decoration of the tabernacle. And it is done so for a very holy purpose. I mean, this was literally the sort of traveling house of God. It was God's RV out there in the desert with the Israelites. And so much went into it, not just material goods, although that was definitely very specific on the material goods. Even the design construction is very specific. You get very specific measurements for the acacia wood and the this and the that. But it starts out with talking about Moses summoning every skilled person to whom the Lord had given ability and who was willing to come do the work. And, they were sort of touched, blessed in a way to correctly and excellently create the tabernacle. And again, it's not just construction. You can consider it, building a building is one thing, architecture-wise, but the curtains. It literally talks about the curtains and the colors of the curtains and the little brass decorations and it's a whole like 35 verses about how specifically the tabernacle was created. And if there is any more of a biblical, like divinely blessed, divinely charged occupation in the Bible, I cannot think of it right now, because the decorators and the architects and the builders or whatever, the people who went into designing and decorating the tabernacle, perhaps had like the most important interior design job in the history of human beings. And it's laid out very specifically. So anybody out there who doesn't think that interior design is a wholly vocational pursuit, divinely directed by the creator of the universe, needs to go ahead and read your Bible, son. Go read Exodus 36. Is this something you studied in school, or have I finally found something to share with you that might give you some value from this interview?
No, it does. I did have a pastor give a sermon once on the value of interior design and architecture because of Exodus 36.
That's a good pastor.
Yes.
Was
so
it because you were
course,
there, or he just happened to be doing it?
No, it was back when I was an undergrad, and so he knew he had a large population of architecture and design students in my class.
Smart pastor.
Yeah.
But it's pretty amazing to think about, and to think about that God in his I mean, he is beauty and the author and definition of beauty, and he cares about beautiful things, and they serve a purpose. And I love, Francis Schaeffer said once that Christian art is the expression of the whole life of the person as a Christian. Art is not to be solely a vehicle for some sort of self-conscious evangelism. And
Well, we needed that
so,
a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, say that again.
Christian art is the
Francis Schaeffer always rolling out the hits here.
I know. And well, his book Art in the Bible is profound, and How Shall We Then Live? He had such a great grasp on art throughout history as it pertains to the church, and spoke with a prophetic voice to where we are now, seeing the trends towards postmodernism and where he thought that would put us morally and as a society. And it's shockingly accurate for where we are today, and how we see the values of the culture shift and become degraded through where art is going. And so he said that, yeah, Christian art is the expression of the whole life of the whole person as a Christian. Art is not to be solely a vehicle for some sort of self-conscious evangelism.
Wow, self-conscious evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, because there's an aspect of like of a focus on self there, the worth on self. Man, yeah, we should have talked to you before we started this thing. That would have been a great quote to have. Yeah, and that's also harkens back to a conversation we had recently with another artist, where, you know, discovering and discussing the purpose of an artist, and what does it mean to be an artist, and what are the pitfalls of being an artist, and what about being an artist can mirror the characteristics of God. And we are talking about the desire to be understood or to communicate something, and how that relates to sort of God's desire to be understood by us, and to communicate to us things that don't quite fit into simple language. And an artist is trying to communicate in a language that is deeper and more profound than simple English or whatever. And yet, you know, God does not suffer a hit to self-esteem or self-value or something when we don't understand him, whereas a human artist has that weakness, where if their art is misunderstood or not received, or communicates the wrong message, then there can be a lot of self-worth wrapped up in that. And so that quote where, hey, a Christian artist is the very act of creating is a reflection of the Christian life, not just a way to, present yourself the way you want to be presented and perceived in the world. So that's very powerful. I like that very much. When it comes to your faith in your work, well, what does that look like? What is your interaction there?
Yeah, that is something that I have been pondering a lot recently. And as I've been thinking on that quote, what does that mean to do work that's more than self-conscious evangelism? What does it mean? Is it George MacDonald who said that our call as believers is not that we shouldn't be admonishing craftsmen to build crosses or to carve crosses into everything? The call is to build excellent chairs or tables.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, finally, a quote we actually did quote. Yes, the charge of the church on a craftsman is not to, not become drunk or to not, basically not to control their behavior, but to encourage them to build the best possible table.
Yes. And so as I think about that and thinking about, okay, again, dealing in a field that feels more materially based, it's been an interesting exercise to try to step back and say, okay, my call isn't to be designing cross-patterned wallpaper, or, necessarily like patterns that have direct relationships with biblical stories or something necessarily. I feel that the call of my work is to do it excellently. And in interior design, I feel uniquely positioned to show the Lord subtly, or I hope that He can work through what I'm doing. And the emphasis should be on the Holy Spirit, that I'm creating these interior environments and I seek to do so honorably and faithfully by caring very deeply and intimately for my clients, by seeking to edify them, to recognize their humanity and the weight of that. As C.S. Lewis says, you're never encountering a mere mortal. And if you knew what a beautiful vision or hideous figure you would be, that they would be one day, you would never take your interactions with them lightly. And therefore, in shaping their homes or their businesses, that is weighty on my mind to think about how is what I'm doing and the way that I'm interacting with them spurring them on towards a more joyful and abundant life, that their environment would provide them with joy and rest so that they can work faithfully where they are, whether that's in the realm of the home or their business. And to think that, okay, while much of what I'm doing is an unspoken or unwritten pointer to the gospel and to the Lord, would the Holy Spirit come in and make that work more profound than my hands can? And I love C.S. Lewis says the first call of art is to receive and to look and take in. It's not to be used. We are simply supposed to sit there almost with our palms up and receive art. And I want to have that posture in my work, that I would be using the gifts that the Lord has given me and holding them loosely and with open hands, saying, okay, Holy Spirit, step in and do your work. You are the one who can make this so much more profound than anything that I'm doing, than any, fabric selection I'm making or floor plan that I'm creating. And then there's more conscious things that I do as well. I think about the family and the power of that and the weight of the family and the significance of that. And even things like arranging living rooms. I mean, I consciously and think through and talk with clients about how we position their furniture. Especially, I've had several clients who are Christians as well, and it's been wonderful to have conversations about family values with them and deciding where we position the TV, not centering their living room arrangements on it, but rather creating conversational clusters of furniture, creating very comfortable breakfast dining nooks and dining rooms that would facilitate conversation and make their homes places in which they can do the work of the Spirit and run their families according to the values and the conscience that the Lord has given them for how they should conduct themselves. Um, it's been such an honor to get to do that with people and to walk alongside them as they determine those family values and to create homes for them that reflect those.
Yeah, now I am kind of thinking about it. It's been really fascinating exploring, all these sort of wackadoodle ideas that I have about the concept, the artistry that goes into interior design, and it's been really fascinating to hear it from you. And now I am thinking about the listeners, and I'm also thinking about Chris, who needs your help desperately. And I could not forgive myself if I did not extract as much billable information from you as
Oh
possible.
no, I was feeling bad. I was gonna let it go after that. I feel like we already got a free consult.
I'm just giving you a hard time. But there certainly are people out there. Now, we can all admit that hiring an interior designer is certainly not a luxury that a lot of people can afford, and yet they're hearing now the real depth of meaning that good interior design can bring to their lives and their futures and their presents, and perhaps even redefining the past if we want to get really woo-woo about it. And no more so unattainable of a person working for them than sort of getting any artist to come in and improve their lives. But for those who maybe don't, have it in the cards to be able to have a professional help them, I am curious. Maybe it's not tips and tricks. Maybe it is. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just simply resources or something like that. What would be a starting point for people to start exploring their space and moving in a direction where they can start making improvements or changes that anybody can do right now? A lot of people listen to podcasts, but specifically this podcast, as they're, cleaning the house or doing something else. And perhaps starting now, if they are so inspired, we could give them some direction where they can even start moving some chairs around as we speak. Oh, as we speak, it'll be like a interactive podcast design experience. Where does this process begin? Perhaps, like if you were bringing them on as a new client, what kind of questions or things would you ask them to pay attention to?
Yeah. So when I talk to a client, I think the whole process should be joyful. If there's anything that I think I seek to explore with my work or to bring up to the surface for a client, it's joy, to take joy in the space that they have and joy in the things that they have around them, and how they get to interact with them. And so I love to ask them.
If I may, I'd like to, I'm sorry,
No,
I hate to interrupt, but I had an idea that might make for a very fun experience.
All right.
Why don't you go through it as if you were talking to them as a client in the room, just giving them inspiration and how to start looking at their space. So no
pressure.
You can use me. You can use me as if I were a client. And so instead of, I would tell the client, you say, Basil, thank you for hiring me. Thank you for your very generous deposit and for flying me out on the private plane to your desert compound, where surely you will survive any apocalypse that is coming to the country or the world. But I really want to make this weird prepper compound a beautiful, livable space for you and the other desert wanderers seeking shelter.
Yeah.
That's something like that. Okay.
If you're going to outlast the apocalypse, you might as well have a beautiful space around you.
Exactly. See, I feel a side project coming on, but we won't talk about that. We'll talk about that off air.
Well, Basil, thank you so much for bringing me out. It's a beautiful piece of property you have here. And I want to ask first what your priorities are. What are you seeking to accomplish with this home? And what
Mm,
rooms do you want to address first?
mm.
Give ourselves
Are
some
these
parameters.
sort of emotional goals or physical
I think it
goals?
should always be a mix of both. How do you
Okay.
live in your space, and how
Hmm.
do you want your space to serve you, both
Yeah.
through physical action and emotion as well, experiential?
Okay. In my life here out in the compound, I would like to survive the nuclear winter, but while I'm inside in my sanctuary, I would like to forget that there's radioactive ash
Mm.
covering the land and sort of cannibalistic marauders riding motorcycles around my property as we speak. But I would just really like to find peace. Peace and comfort, I guess, would be the number one.
Okay. It's actually hilarious that you would use this as an example because, of course, nature and natural light and views are so fundamentally and inherently tied to the interior environment. So to think about the fact that there's simply ash outside, well, um, we have no vistas that we need to focus our furniture
You're
groupings around.
you're
And
making her job really hard.
no,
Yes,
no,
as well, perhaps someday she will have a client like
that's
this
true.
and she'll Slumdog Millionaire style remember when this sort of annoying podcaster put her through uh, the ringer. So here you go. Okay, there you go. So, yes, I mean, out my window, I can see a broad expanse of the desert and sort of a low level fire
Mm,
that has been burning for months, making the sky glow a constant shade of blood
mm.
red, day or night. And yes, so we can tie that in if we want.
Wonderful. So I would love to ask you, before the apocalypse began, what
Mm,
did you enjoy? Were there specific colors that you loved, or
mm,
fashion designers, if you were sartorially inclined? What
yeah.
what stood out to you? You said you watch Wes Anderson movies, obviously. Were there uh, decorations and color schemes in these films that stuck with you? Are
Absolutely.
you a cinephile who do you notice scenes in movies and setting? What inspires
Yeah,
you?
color is very important to me. I find, well, if we're talking about Wes Anderson, obviously color being one of the core
Hmm.
principles, setting his style apart as an auteur. Bold, solid colors are nice. The pinks, the blues, the almost again the colors being a character themselves. I do appreciate that. And again, Wes Anderson, but also, has some references to this, but sort of like the Downton Abbey gold picture frame, ornate type of feeling. I've heard it once described as maximalist.
Mm,
So,
wow.
does it feel, yeah.
Wow.
So that's kind of what I tend to drift towards. Back in the before times, um, before the Amazon drones stopped delivering furniture out to my house.
Wonderful. And you mentioned earlier you wanted a Victorian office or cave-like room. Is that correct? So
I think, yes, is Victorian the right word? I'm not 100%, but that's just the word that I know that I can connect to it.
sure. I'm
Sort of
assuming,
like a Downton
uh-huh.
Abbey sort of aristocratic feel.
Yes, heavy millwork and wood
Mm,
carving,
yes.
ornate. So I
Yeah.
would ask you to consider those things. It's always helpful when a client can pull together some visual references of things that they enjoy. Sometimes it's very helpful to take a trip to their closet and see what they have. Obviously, with the apocalypse well underway, your options may be limited, but it's helpful to have those kinds of tangible references. And I would want to take a walk with you around the property, around your home to see the objects that you already have, how we can incorporate those. I take note of those and would encourage you as we start this process to think about how you live. There was a famous interior designer who said that he liked to arrange a room and then have a party, and however the furniture was left at the end of the night. that's how he knew the room should
Oh.
be arranged, because that's how people lived in it. So I would encourage you to invite anyone over that you know, and see
Mm-hmm.
how they interact with your space. And we can make a list of your needs based on that, what furnishings we're looking to procure for you. And we'll start to build from the ground up. So always start with the floor. I typically suggest we start with a rug and pull colors from there, which will inform our upholstery, our wall colors, our drapery. Think about patterns that you like. Think about your own wardrobe again. Do you wear primarily solids? Do you like patterned pieces? Do you prefer leather or linen? Do you like wovens? Think through those things.
Those are two great tips. Start from the floor and work up. I feel like I've literally done the opposite my entire life.
Mm.
I'll start with like painting the wall just a color that I like, or maybe, yeah, I mean, that's always it. Start with the color and then try to work my way down. And it may explain a lot of the deficiencies that I've found in my life. And having the party thing, that is what a wonderful trick to apply in all sorts of examples, but definitely the sort of where does the furniture sort of get herded naturally by party-goer sort of furniture shepherds is a great advice. Now, nowadays, post-apocalypse, the radiation has caused many of my neighbors to grow extra limbs. And so I feel like there may be some alterations needed to be done on the furniture. But in a case where either finances don't allow for a brand new, shopping spree, or
I was
the
going to
society
ask
has
what your budget
collapsed.
was with your maximalist
Yeah.
Victorian.
Right. Or society has collapsed. Is this a process that like can be done little by little, or is it more effective to do it as like sort of one grand vision?
So it really depends upon your personal preference. That's another reason that I recommend starting from the floor and working your way up. A rug can range in price. I mean, rugs have an infinite price range. So you can find something at whatever price point or whatever within whatever budget you're working. Start with the floor, have this one big piece. And like I said, if you follow the tip from earlier, um, get a rug that fits your room. Take it closer to the wall than you think you need to. And from there, you can build up piece by piece. If you find a piece of art, feel free to go ahead and grab it if you love it. If you love it, it will work. You will make something work in your space that you love. And again, your space should be a reflection of you. So go piece by piece as your budget allows. Start with the rug, paint the walls next. That will make, of course, the biggest difference. Or put up a wallpaper. There are so many budget-friendly papers now. There are removable papers. So, long gone are the traumatic days of scraping wallpaper off from a previous owner.
Oh, that's a great tip. My goodness. You're going to have to send me some links because I love wallpaper, but it terrifies me.
Yes. Well, it's very low commitment now, so there are options for you. But yeah, I always encourage people to do what they can with what they have. It shouldn't be intimidating. Again, it should be joyful. So as you're willing to experiment, um, buy a piece that may scare you a little bit, but you feel is exciting, or paint your walls a
Ooh.
bolder shade. If you're looking at the lightest shade on the color card, go down one or two shades and paint something a little bolder. You always get more enjoyment out of a room that is more saturated or enveloped in a beautiful color, as opposed to I mean, off whites and whites are beautiful too, but I always encourage clients to, especially on a lower budget, be a little more bold with their color choices and make sure that their
I
room brings joy.
I love that because, yes, I'm always astounded by, I mean, of course, when you purchase a home or you move into a new apartment or whatever, I understand the concept of painting everything white so whoever comes in can kind of imagine their life in whatever they want instead of living with the colors you chose beforehand. I get that. But so often, that's like I mean, walls just stay white forever, for eternity. Do you think, is painting a wall or maybe doing this fancy new non-committal, millennial non-committal, scared of relationships wallpaper, that seems like the biggest thing, like the cheapest option for maximal impact.
Yes, 100%. That and a rug. Again, you should think of a room as, 6 surfaces: your floor, your 4 walls, and your ceiling. Don't forget your ceilings.
Mm.
And I think a room should feel warm, or have, as Chris was saying earlier, that intangible um, energy or feeling, that feeling of warmth. There should be a reaction, or emotion stirred in you from being in the space with no furnishings and no art. So I would definitely say that wallpaper and paint are a very quick way to ensure that a room speaks to you, if you will, with nothing else in it.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you. So I think for those who, like myself here in my post-apocalyptic bunker, who don't have the time or finances to hire someone necessarily yet, until our Bitcoin matures or something, simply paint on the walls and a rug, and a nice big rug can really transform the space. That's what I'm hearing. Yes.
Yes. And can I ask you about Bitcoin? Or
Sure.
So obviously
Yeah.
there's a big push in art for NFTs, and I've been doing some research into what design will look like in the digital landscape. Have you done any research into this, or looked into?
Girl, you are getting into my zone now. Okay, here we go. Yes. So I'm not sure if this has been mentioned before, but I've been a podcaster for a very long time, and my main podcast right now, I do a ton of talking about futurism, futurology, technology, Bitcoin, robots, that kind of stuff. And I, again, kind of like this podcast, I love to talk about those things in the context of the human experience, spirituality, and stuff like that. So I'm excited, and I'm going to hopefully not destroy the beautiful work we've done on this show already. So the question is what? I'm sorry.
Well,
I got too excited. My ears started to ring, so I need to hear the question again.
I have talked to a few interior designers, and I'm starting to hear rumblings in the design industry. So interior design is a very, in many ways, antiquated industry. We are pretty slow on the technology train a lot of the time, but there are some forward-thinking designers, and I've been pondering what this will look like, contemplating how the metaverse and similar VR, AR environments are going to impact our industry. What kind of a future is there for design in the digital landscape? And so I wondered if you had come across anything about that, or seen anyone designing these environments for people.
I can certainly apply my wealth of knowledge to the concept here live extemporaneously. I have not talked to any other interior designers, maybe literally ever in my life, but I'm immediately inspired with a couple of possibilities. Fashion, I'm going to take an example from fashion, and maybe we can translate that over. When it comes to the metaverse and VR, and specifically AR, augmented reality, which is, like a pair of glasses that will overlay digital things onto the actual world around you, which may be used for such maniacal things as advertising, but also fashion, digital fashion. And where, you're wearing your sort of Tony Stark glasses, and you look at someone, and if they have purchased their, Gucci NFT cyber fashion thing, then they will be overlaid with that. And so when it comes to interior design, I can see a couple of possibilities. First of all, for design purposes and perhaps like demonstrations, things like that, you can get a 3D scanner. And they're fairly affordable. I don't know if you've heard of Matterport, which is it's a real estate tool, but I think it can easily be used for interior design, where you take a 3D sort of virtual reality picture of the space, and then digitally you'll be able to go in there and completely design it digitally in a way that your customer or client can actually enter the space with a VR helmet and experience what their new life would be like, sort of all at once in a big picture, which is very exciting. I'm sure that's been brought up in your space. But on the AR side, the augmented reality, it is totally a thing where at some point when it comes to, art and colors and rugs, things that are not necessarily physically interacted with, if you're wearing your Tony Stark glasses in your living room, your space can look however you want. I mean, you can have your NFTs hanging up on the wall. You can have your rug, your colors, your paint a different color. Sort of in the distant future when people are wearing their AR glasses in sort of a constant fashion, much how we do with our phones right now. We always have our phones. We're almost never without our phones. Same will be with our AR experiences, which will eventually be contact lenses as well. So there will be almost no transition between the real world and the augmented reality world. And so, decorating for a party or decorating for an event or just having your space be decorated in a different way every day of the week is so possible. You don't even have to look that far forward to experience that. And of course, there are some sort of pretty dystopian takes on what life will be like when that is the case. But much like fashion, it feels like interior design will have that similar aspect to the industry, where you can charge the premium prices for design and exclusivity via NFTs, but not have the manufacturing costs, the traditional supply chain issues, the mixing of the color to get it wrong or whatever. And we've actually talked to another artist in this series who is already starting to work on what it would take to, create his art in virtual reality. And I think that might be a skill that a future forward thinking interior designer might need to start working on as well. I'm assuming these things have already been chatted about in your industry.
I've started to hear about them. I'm sure it's more developed and farther ahead in architecture. I definitely can see them being more keen to jump on that. And obviously, as you said, real estate, that obviously has a profound impact. I know some companies like Royal Caribbean, their interior designers use a 3D virtual reality, they call it the pit, and it's this room that they can build, digital 3D models in, and so they can walk around a scale version of the cruise ship to see how everything looks, or their private islands. They can model out the islands and experience those, but to be able to do so, more intimately with AR or VR glasses is incredible.
Yeah, and here's what I'm telling everybody, and I've been right about a lot of things here, Margaret. This is way closer than we expect. The amount of institutional money and advertiser support, which pretty much dictates reality in our world now, and the economics behind the metaverse, AR, VR, things like that, they've reached a point where this is inevitable, and it's just a matter of timing. And I think it'll be way sooner than anybody expects. I expect there to be, a daily wearable AR device that will hopefully catch on. There's been a few versions that haven't quite caught on, so it's just a matter of time before somebody really nails it. And I expect a daily AR device to be available, and first adopters will be popularizing it in the next 5 years. And so yeah, getting in on it now, even if it's just sort of like a pet project hobby type thing, to learn the technology, when in 5 years, you'll be at the top of the game, or at least prepared for it. And with the blockchain and NFT stuff, I'm not necessarily an NFT enthusiast, but there's already, right now, as we speak, high schoolers in India who spend their day creating some sort of little NFT shoe or something that they make available and sell and make a ton of money right now, for people in the metaverse who want this cool shoe. And I think one part of perhaps all artists, but talking about interior designers, I think it's very possible that if you build those skills now, in 5 years, you could easily make that a pretty primary source of income, just by having sort of a gallery of designs that people can apply to their space, whether it's in the metaverse or in their AR living room, something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, I would encourage you to look into it and stay on top of it. But not everybody wants to live in the future when it's not there yet. But it is inevitable.
It's so fascinating. I'm so curious to see how this plays out. And I mean, as you said, 5 years is a very fast timeline. So to see how this will begin to change.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
Does that, how do you feel about that? Is that scary? Do you feel like maybe that takes something away from the art? Or, because that's one of the big things being sort of maybe not discussed outright, but that is one of the debates happening in culture. Is a virtual, there are economic forces that would love to blur the distinction between virtual reality and actual reality. And some artists are wrestling with that. In the meantime, they're making, millions of dollars on NFTs. But what I'm interested, sort of spiritually or emotionally, what does that bring up in you?
Yeah. So I have several friends who make NFTs, and so I'm very familiar with the space. And I was having a conversation with some former undergrad classmates last night. Actually, we were talking about different ideas for digital skins. Basically, we were talking about VR and AR, and of course, for years people have been putting money into video game outfits and skins, and these add-ons for different apps that they have, or game options that there are to customize your players or customize your home environments in the digital world already. And so to do that in a way that's more closely linked to, or as you said, the lines become blurred between your own reality and the digital space, is highly interesting to me. I think one reason interior design is a more tech fearful industry is because of, again, the close ties we have to the tactile. And tactility and the physical space is what we do, and the human emotional connection to space. Sometimes in my imagination, it's very hard to divorce. And I know some people put on VR headsets and feel, wow, I understand how people could struggle with using this too much. And I put them on, and I think because of how, I wouldn't even say physically oriented I am, but because of the great weight that I put on the built environment, it feels hard to imagine that being of such great interest to me. But I understand how it is for other people. So I, of course, have a bit of sadness because there is something so profound about the physical space. I think about, being in a beautiful cathedral or church building. There's something worshipful about that, just the building itself and the architecture, and how throughout architectural history, we've used different physical features to point us to the Lord and to worship him through ornamentation and the building, and the overall impact that has on your worship of him in a church setting, or even in nature, the grandeur of nature. Of course, God is the perfect and original architect. And so there is a a pensiveness or a sadness when I think about the loss of that, or that people would be more than happy for those lines to be blurred. Specifically, as you said, it seems pretty intrinsically tied towards corporate interests, or money making abilities. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm just curious. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, more than anything, the metaverse is sort of driven by profit motive, because it is a new sort of endless profit frontier that does not rely on supply chains or resource extraction or human workers or whatever, So it's primarily that. And I think a lot of the drive for the virtual world is sort of corporate propaganda in a way. But I think you're right. One thing that I find sort of deeply tied to this, which you alluded to, was scale. In the digital world or the metaverse world, scale is so relative, and things can be made bigger, can be made smaller, they can be made, whatever size, but at the same time, you're not bound by the traditional, laws of physics and gravity and whatever. So in theory, you could fly if there's a giant mountain and where traditionally it's just sort of like this unattainable majesty. The ancients, considered the gods to live on the mountains because they were so unreachable and humongous. Well, now the virtual world, you can just kind of like fly up, and you lose that impenetrable mystery that comes with scale. Whereas, so in the virtual world, there's sort of an unveiling of the mystery. There's a destruction of the mystery, trading it in for this mastery, this mystery versus mastery concept, which is funny because in our world, human beings love mastery, and we more or less hate mystery. If we are sort of unintentional, unthoughtful, or not unthoughtful, but just reacting to our environment. We hate mystery, we love mastery, and that's where we love the virtual world, because we can master everything and there are no mysteries. But if you talk about the spiritual life, I mean, it's all about the mysteries of God, and the mastery over God is what got us in trouble in the first place. You're talking about Tower of Babel, talking about Eve in the garden. You're talking about every great folly of man throughout at least spiritual history comes from the desire of mastery over nature and the desire of mastery over God. Where the virtual world takes that away in the name of profit, basically. Where the real world, you're talking about mountains, you're talking about cathedrals, there's an awe, there's a certain sense of awe and a drop in your gut when you are faced with something so outside of your scale, which is very important, both just sort of emotionally and psychologically, but also spiritually, I think. So that is the one good thing about it, is I don't think the virtual world will be able to keep that mystery and that awe alive. And eventually, two things will happen. People will either lose interest, or they will lose, if they don't lose interest or somehow they are kept in there, either against their will, whether they know it or not, or they're just sort of tricked into devoting their lives to this virtual world. They will either lose interest or they will lose something that is very special about being a human being, coming in contact with something that is unimaginably bigger than you. So in that sense, I think you're right. There will be a major segment of human beings who are in tune with these types of ideas who won't fall prey. But I think it'll be a minority. And that awe and that mystery is something that is so beautifully communicated in interior design and architecture and art in general. So as an artist, it's your job. You got to stop this. Help us, Margaret. Stop this.
yeah, there's a speaker who says that stories will save the world, and hearing you say that, I wonder if that's not the case. That I mean that, yeah, stories and our investment in the stories of the people around us, if those um, if the importance of story is what will keep us from succumbing to, the digital landscape, if you will, if we remember that um, there is such a thing as beauty and it is important. I just can't help but wonder if our fascination with and obsession with things like the metaverse is a symptom of us being starved for beauty. And
Mm.
I think we're so obviously starved for it because, at least what I saw in part in architecture and architectural history classes that I took in school, and in different literature, there seems like such an active rebellion against beauty, and I know in, modern art in part as well, this this just resistance to the objective principles of beauty, of scale, as we mentioned a moment ago, and um, color, and these different things that we know make art and are indicators of beauty that our brains inherently perceive when they're in harmony with one another as being beautiful and good. And I just saw in the college environment that there was such a revolt against that, and I wonder if that's fed us towards this digital precipice, if you will, kind of
Yeah.
opening Pandora's box and trading our real stories for ones that we can alter at a moment's notice. Which, again, what does that do? What does that do to truth? What does that say about our relationship with truth? And I don't know, is that a symptom of our denial of truth, or our um, hatred of it, our unwillingness to
Is,
succumb to a truth greater than ourselves, to have looking glasses as opposed to mirrors?
do you think that? Oh, I like that. Do you think that that's a result of the focus on function over form, like the function of technology or the function of the metaverse taking precedent over sort of the form of life?
I wonder, because so I think form and function are equally important,
Mm.
because a function obviously dictates the well, in some ways, the usefulness or merit of the space. And
Mm.
Francis Schaeffer had four tenets that he used, or four principles, to determine if something was good art or not. And one of those he called virtue, or purity. And it was the artist's intent behind what he created, if it was good intent, or if he was um, he had ill intent with what he was making and what he sought to convey to his audience. And so, to me, it's you have poor intent or just careless. You're very careless if you're not creating a building that functions well. You're doing a disservice to the people using it. But I've wondered if it's more akin to our postmodernist and now maybe these neo-Aristotelian leanings to emphasize the. It's still experientially focused, but it's more so about ego and what it does for self as opposed to the user. So it's not even necessarily that we've considered form or function more than the other. It's maybe we've quit considering them at all, and instead are just looking for, these big grand buildings to be mirrors of ourselves, as opposed to
Mm.
conveying something far removed from ourselves, which I think is, I mean, think about, as you mentioned earlier, the Tower of Babel. That's just architecture gone wrong. And it wasn't, it was, to unite all these people, but it was them, again, as you said, trying to gain mastery and to remove mystery. I think when we marry form and function, that is a mysterious relationship, and that there are unknowns and variables in how humans will relate to the space. Um, but when we quit considering that altogether and instead just, I guess, begin to navel gaze effectively, maybe that's where we're really going wrong.
Well, if there's anything I've learned from this is that interior designers will save us all. And so you, in this coming dystopia, we're going to be counting on you to pull us all out of it. You gotta give us a reason to get out of the metaverse, Margaret. I believe in you.
Thank you. It's a weighty calling, but
It is. It's a heavy burden, but somebody has to do it. Chris, are you alive?
Yeah, I'm just over here trying to figure out how theologians are going to be able to make NFTs in the future.
Oh no, that's when we're all doomed.
So don't know what my contribution will be there, but I will figure
we're
it
all
out
doomed.
and let everybody know.
Yeah. Well, you have anything to add or subtract or divert, Chris, before we explore what maybe landing this plane might look like?
No. I mean, there was lots of really good stuff there. Certainly did not expect us to get so philosophical here at the end.
Oh, that's always the plan,
But
baby.
I could add, but I think it was wonderful. I got lost in the play, in the little skit there, and then it just carried
yes.
on. But no.
You mean lost in sort of a delightful, whimsical way?
Yes,
Yes.
being
Not,
entertained, amused.
Good. Yes.
But
But also learning.
yes. I didn't think that we would learn so much, and there have been lots of bits to consider, moving forward from here. So we do very much appreciate your time, Margaret, and we cannot let it go unsaid that you have the distinct privilege of being the very first female to appear on
Oh my gosh, we
Ravel
finally did it.
podcast. Yes.
Thank God for you, Margaret.
Yes.
thank you for the honor.
A
In
trendsetter.
classic fashion, it took us 20 episodes to be like, wait a second, we haven't had any ladies on the podcast. Oh no, we're those podcasters. Oh no. Anyway, so thank you very, very much. Now, again, I don't want to close the door on any of this before you feel completely satisfied. Was there something burning on your heart or a concept that warrants discussion that we have not touched on?
No, not specifically. Ever since I connected with y'all about this series, of course, it's really had me thinking again about what it looks like to be a Christian in this space. And it's so curious too, because I think I listened, of course, to your opening introductory episode, and I listened to the first one you put out about the exegetical artist, which was incredible. Oh my goodness. It was so fascinating. But I think it's interesting to talk about design versus art too, and how they look quite different in practice. I think, of course, design is more inherently tied to business and therefore commerce, and has a different kind of relationship. And again, it's a service industry versus, I mean, of course, there's always been patronage and things throughout history, but it is different to be tied to clients in the way that designers are. But I don't know. Did I answer questions well about that?
Honestly, I didn't even think about it, but you're right. There is I mean, what is that distinction that between the designer and an artist? I mean, I guess there is the economic relationship is different because art still has an economic relationship. And of course, artists can take, I guess, commission or, have a patron, like you mentioned.
Maybe,
and I guess design, what you're saying is design is more inherently tied to a client relationship.
Yeah, and business and commerce in a way. I mean, maybe that's a moot point, not so inherently true, because of course there's plenty of artists who make a living from what they do. But anyway, That was just something that I had been
No, I think it is fascinating. Yeah, because but I think there's also a different, an additional taxonomy of design, and that is that there is function involved in design. Yes, like inherently function is a consideration, whereas with art, there's not necessarily an inherent part of art that function is a piece of it. In fact, there's been sort of roguish artists, especially throughout the past, the 20th century, who sort of the art is the lack of function or the mismatch of function or something like that.
Hmm.
I'm not going to know any of the historical references or names or anything, but wasn't there like a phase, and that still kind of pops up once in a while, the absurdity of and of the lack of function. It like is the art, like that
Yeah.
is what is so artful about it. I'm thinking of like Banksy, who had his picture at the auction in a frame, but it turns out the frame was a shredder, and it shredded the picture when it got sold, and like that was the art. The art was the lack of the complete lack of function that this art could have, because now it's destroyed. Whereas a designer, it seems like function, usability, the interaction with something, whether it be psychologically or emotionally or physically, is like a core principle of good design. Yeah.
Right. And what differentiates, again, as you're saying, if you're judging, maybe good design or bad design, right, usability is inherently tied to that, and would indicate a positive or negative outcome for a client experience. Um, and maybe even the lens through which they see the world is slightly different. I don't know. That's something I've often pondered is, I don't
Yeah.
feel
Well,
like an artist, but there must be, a unique lens through which I'm seeing the world, because first of all, the Lord made us all uniquely, but secondly, there is some, specific gifting that he's given me that I would assume has something to do with the unique vantage point from
yeah.
which I see the world.
I'm so tempted to like dive into some sort of uh, rant that will catalyze some sort of civil war between artists and designers, because in a way, you think of you think of the tabernacle having this very interesting combination of artistry to it, but also very specific design from the Lord for a purpose. And they had to be so specific, because if it was not executed in the way that it was given, then perhaps the function of the place would not fit the form. And I'm almost tempted to sort of categorize designers in some sort of like higher status than a mere
Oh
artist
no.
who creates for the aesthetic with no function. But from talking to you, and from what have just now learned about the work that you do, certainly art is a large piece of it. And we've discussed the difference between sort of art and craft, or trade or something. We couldn't quite nail down the exact term. Craft being sort of a technical execution, a focus on technical execution, and art being more of an aesthetic vision, or an execution of the vision. Maybe design and designer is somewhere in there, or a combination of the two. I did not know that there were so many ways to discuss or categorize people who make beautiful things. You're going to save us all. Can I just end with that? Did we lose you, or are
No, I'm
you
still here.
stricken, wordless? Okay, good. I love that, by the way. I love what you just did to me. That was excruciating and panic-inducing, but letting me sit in the silence after my rant was a punishment that I definitely deserved, and deserve more often. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's
Okay.
inspiring, so thank you.
It, yes, and your silence was inspiring me as well to be a little bit more aware of my ramblings. All right, Chris, are you good?
I'm good.
Margaret, are you good?
Yeah, thank y'all so much. It's so exciting to get to talk to y'all. I, again, so thoroughly enjoyed listening to the introductory episode and the first episode you did. They were phenomenal, and thank you so much for letting me have some of your time and get to talk to y'all.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for giving us your time, and a shout out to your dad for connecting us.
Yeah.
We couldn't have done it without him. So thank you, Dad.
He's a
Thank you,
dedicated
Margaret's
listener.
dad.
Yeah.
Oh, good. God bless him. Well, sorry I spoke too much. I should have let Margaret talk more, Dad, but we can do that next time, because surely now we have an expert to bring back on the show. Can you tell everybody where to find your work, how to get in touch with you? Maybe if they're interested in having such a thoughtful and talented interior designer come out and design their post-apocalyptic bunker, how can they get in touch and check out your stuff?
Yes, the best way to find me is through my website, which is margaretdaniel.com. Feel free to send me an email. And if you would like to see examples of my work, I have an Instagram, Margaret I. Daniel. And that's the best way to reach out to me. So send me a message. I'd be happy to connect with you.
Go do that. Go do that, folks. She's got lots of wonderful examples of her work and inspiring things to make you think about what life could be like with just a little bit of help with Margaret. Margaret Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes, thank
y'all.
you.
And there you have it, folks. You weren't expecting that, were you? Weren't expecting that, were you?
None of us were.
None of us were. How could we? How could we ever? But what a wonderful person, wonderful, thoughtful artist and designer. And make sure to check out her Instagram, and I think she has a Pinterest too, that just chock-a-block full of cool stuff. I mean, I'm just so amped now to go ahead and start changing my surroundings in order to influence my life in a positive way. Sorry we weren't able to get more tips and tricks out there, Chris. I mean,
listen, I asked for 3 tips, and you got a whole walkthrough of a home makeover, so I'm not really,
tricks of the trade, Chris. Tricks of the trade.
Yeah. No, but very, very enlightening, very educational. Thank you so much, Margaret, for your time, for coming on, and we will add you to the Rolodex here for sure.
Mm-hmm. Have you discovered your interior design motif? I don't know, your favorite one. What's your favorite design aesthetic?
I prefer the kind of I like that. I mean, I'm sitting in my office here, and it's just I have very, dark wood cabinets and shelves and random sized pictures hung all over the wall, which I'm now measuring how high they are from the top of my desk and my ceiling. And it's hard to, I don't know. It's kind of like, I like that kind of like, feels like a cigar lounge kind of thing, but
the eccentric scholar.
Yeah.
That's what I call it.
I guess so. Yeah, I also have all my Lego sets though mixed in between my books. So
the eccentric scholarly man-child.
Yeah. Everybody's got a thing. I just love my Lego. So
yeah, no, I also love Lego. Are you sleepy, Chris? Do we need a real nap?
I don't know. It's a little bit. It's, a lot going on. Very tired. New church, baby coming, redoing a second bathroom here in my house. So, yeah, a little bit tired and, watching the clock. Got about 3 appointments this evening after we get done. So, a lot on my mind. A lot on my mind today.
Chris has got a place to be. Okay. Well, that means we can shorten this down, I guess, a little bit here. No need to ramble on at the end. Since you asked, Chris, I'm starting to form my own opinions about the sort of interior design, decorative motifs that I'm starting to lean towards.
Your maximalist Victorian.
Yeah, I'm thinking Victorian cowboy maximalism.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I would if Margaret ever comes out and helps design the bunker, we're going for a Victorian cowboy maximalism.
I'm picturing like a gold steer's head, like a gold skull of a cow somewhere in there.
Oh yeah.
A lot of leather. Fine leather.
I do want to brag a little bit because as a millennial human, haven't had a whole lot of time or resources to sort of invest in art or I don't know, just things that are very specific to design. I recently was at an estate sale and purchased a I don't know, what is it called? Not a real one, but like a I don't want to say knockoff because it's not a knockoff. It's a good piece, but it's sort of a replica. That's what it is.
Like a faux something? What are you getting at?
I'm going to go with replica. A replica Remington cowboy statuette figurine, something like that. Are you familiar with these forms, these statues?
I think that I know what you're talking about, but
yeah, they're kind of like the classic Western sort of cast iron statue of a man on sort of an angry horse, or sometimes a bull. It's very sort of action packed. You can tell that this cowboy is holding on for dear life.
You're gonna do your whole house around this little figure that you got?
It's definitely the most poignant piece of inspiration that I currently have in my possession. And these little Remington statues, some of them go for like thousands of dollars for like a foot tall, sculpture. But I got a replica. I got it for like $50, so I'm stoked. It's my new piece of beauty that I guess just get to look at and imagine myself either as the cowboy holding on for dear life or the horse trying to get this ding-dang cowboy off my back. Yeah. So there you go, folks. Go Google that if you want to know what my new aesthetic piece looks like. All right. Do you want to end this?
I mean, I'm not eager to, but unless there's anything, real pertinent.
Here's what's real pertinent, folks. The past couple episodes, I've taken a big old vitamin B pill right before the show, thinking it'll sort of,
vitamin Basil.
Keep me sharp. Oh, good one. Keep me sharp, keep me on my toes. And it turns out that this is very effective podcasting strategy, maybe even too effective, thinking about too many things and rambling on to so much so that it puts Christopher to sleep.
I'm gonna need one for the
your baby
that I have later this evening. No, just to get through the night.
Yeah, I was thinking once the baby comes, if the baby is having a hard time going to sleep, just dial up old Uncle Basil on the Skype machine. I'll just ramble to your baby about, the spiritual implications of technology and how the metaverse is, sort of a corporate monstrosity attempting to reform reality in this modern age. That baby will go right to sleep. And
I was going to just play some of my sermons. Put him to sleep.
Your sermons are too exciting. He's going to be too engrossed, too enthralled by your theological mastery. You really just need some podcaster to ramble on about the technocalypse, and that baby will go right to bed.
Amen.
See, I'm doing that thing that Margaret did to me. Just complete silence. I've had enough of the film with silence.
I almost stepped in there, but I thought, no, we'll see what happens here.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's about time somebody let me sit in the ambient silence.
Oh.
Look at this. This is another Frederick Remington End of Trail bronze sculpture. I'm going to get that. All right. Well, I've got more sculptures to look at.
Yeah,
and
you got to let me go. I got so many tasks to accomplish tonight.
You know, all that silence, you could have taken the reins and ended the podcast. I think
I
you
didn't
want
want to. I didn't want to take it anywhere that it shouldn't have gone.
Okay. The weirdest outro ever. You're welcome, folks. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Ravel. Remember to leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out the show in ways you couldn't even imagine. Gets those algorithms rolling, is great for visibility. And if you have any other suggestions or know an artist or someone that we can talk to, if you know a woman, any woman in your life who wants to be on a podcast, send us an email at contact@ravelpodcast.com. Or if you want to find out all of our links, you can go to ravelpodcast.com, right? Yeah.
That's it.
Ravelpodcast.com. You can find all our social medias and videos and things like that. Okie dokie. Well, there you go. Thanks again, folks. And tune in next time. Chris, do your thing.
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
It's the vitamin B.